Live again.
Good
Picking back up
morning.
from where we left off last week, which was us discussing having intentional goals for our business. Because
Yes.
despite our national security policy appearing to be hope, that is not a strategy in business. So
Mm-mm.
last week we spoke about establishing realistic revenue goals for the year, which is a starting point to a much larger picture. So, but before we get into the next phase of that, let's recap the perimeters that go into establishing realistic sales goals. In order to establish 2026 goals, going back as far as possible with the data is going to give the greatest insight into what the standard financial performance of a business is, as far as the amount of revenue that it brings in and the margins that it maintains throughout the generation of that revenue. This calculator enables us to go back to 2024. However, when I was consulting for the consulting firm that I resigned from, we would generally go back 4 years in order to put together
Mm.
these calculations. But providing a starting point, that's the intent of this calculator. However, like I said, you can go back multiple years to get a greater understanding of what the actual uh, annual goal should look like and what that quarterly distribution should look like. So, in other words, if we were to analyze from 2022 on, and based on from 2022, 23, 24, and 25, we average 30% of our total revenue coming in the first quarter and 20% of our total revenue coming in the second quarter, then obviously that's going to be derived from all of those multiple years, which gives us more clear insight into what to expect moving forward. But again, going back to this is just giving us 2 years from 2024 and 2025. So the parameters that we're going to enter here is an increase from $490,000 in 2024 to $545,000 in 2025, and what that does to the projection for 2026. So to do that, we're going to enter in our 490,000 for 2024, which was the full year's performance. And then in um, 2025, we're entering the revenue by month.
Mm.
34, 685, to
Can I ask you this? Hopefully, it doesn't throw you off. Why would you enter it by month for last year, but not like why can't I just do the whole year for 2025?
we can do that, but that will lack the quarterly distribution aspect of it. So
Mm,
by
okay.
us knowing how much that we brought in quarter one of 2025, which gets calculated by January, February, and March, or the second
Okay.
quarter of the year, which is calculated by April, May, and June, so on and so forth. The quarterly distribution in 2025 gives us insight into how to plan for 2026. But that goes back to what I was explaining a moment ago, which is this calculator is set up to provide just some form of insight. But in
Okay.
order to get more accurate to what that quarterly distribution pattern looks like, it'll be better to input the information for multiple years. So
Mm.
beyond further back than 2024, and
Gotcha.
actually entering the information by month instead of by the totals, so that we know what
Yeah. Because
historically. Go
last year
ahead.
you talked about seasonal
Mm-hmm.
um droughts, and so I
Seasonality.
guess this would be a lot better to have it by quarters so you can know if you have a quarter that is slower and how you can plan for that.
Absolutely.
So while he's putting this in, if you were tuned in with us last week and you did your revenue, if you use a revenue calculator, let us know. Drop it in the comments if you found it useful, if you looked at it at all. Um, Again, it is a free resource. It doesn't ask you for a credit card or anything like that. Just put in your email, put in your information, and again, your information is not stored. Once you enter it into the calculator and click and get your results, it's no longer tracked by Bullseye Consulting.
That is a fact. Now, you'll notice how we're entering information in three formats. So in 2024, and this goes back to your point, Matassa. In 2024, we entered the total amount of revenue for the full year, whereas in 2025, we entered the amount by month.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2026, we're entering the information by week. Now, the reason that we are entering the information by week in 2026 is this calculator also gives you insight into how close that you are to hitting the projected growth or shrinkage in 2026.
Okay.
10,000, which I'll cover again in just a second. All right. So we've now entered in the updated information for 2026. And when we go to calculate our results, we can see our distribution, where when it comes to growth trajectory, which is how much growth that we achieved from 2024 to 2025, that we get a score. And then maintaining a balance, a balanced distribution of revenue, is that seasonal balance.
Mm.
And then
Season.
the execution pace speaks to how well that we've been performing in 2026 relative to the established goal. Taking a look here, as I mentioned at the beginning, we had an increase from 490,000 to 545,000, which is an 11.3% increase.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the information that we input in 2025, that monthly information, we can see the quarterly distributions. So we brought in 25% of the total revenue in 2025 in quarter one, 24.3 in quarter two, 22.4 in quarter three, and 28.3% in quarter four. So
Mm.
based on the 11.3% growth from 24 to 25, that puts our 2026 goal at 607,000. So based on the information that's been input for 2026, we are currently pacing behind our increased goal of 11.3%, where we're currently reflecting that if we continue to perform at the pace that we're performing at so far in 2026,
Mm-hmm.
we would fall short of our planned increase of 11.3%, because we are
Oh.
currently projected to bring in 473,
Ooh.
which is short of the 607. So
Yeah.
again, the insight in knowing where we truly are already in our financial result, in our performance rather, when we know that we're below our goal, then we can take intentional steps right now to make up for that, because we know going into quarter two, we're already behind the eight ball. and we
Mm-hmm.
know by how much that we are behind the eight ball, and we can make that adjustment accordingly. So, actually, before I move on to the next piece, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, it does because you want to track what you're doing, where you're going. And yeah, I think a lot of business owners could probably, well, definitely benefit from this calculator. And like you said, instead of guessing or hoping, right, like a lot of people are doing, that I make up the money or I make as much money, you can see what the numbers are and then make a plan and execute it.
Right.
So
100%.
yeah.
100%. And to that point, you know, this conversation evolves to, the what the resource looks like for us to really have real-time insight into how well that we're truly performing. And where that comes from is having a dashboard that takes into account, all of the real-time accounting. Now,
Mm-hmm.
before we get into that resource, that dashboard resource that can provide that insight, let's talk a little context. So, I mentioned this. I asked this last week as far as, if you were to hop into your car and your
Mm.
dashboard is completely out. So, in other words, you got no speedometer to tell you how fast that you're going. You have no fuel gauge to let you know if you have enough in the tank to get where you're going. You have no temperature gauge to let you know if your engine is in danger of overheating. And you have no oil gauge to let you know if all of the components within your engine are properly lubricated so that you don't end up broke down on the side of the road with a seized engine. That the same purpose that the dashboard in our vehicle serves is the same purpose that a dashboard in our business serves. Because as we're looking at our revenue performance and we're looking at the margins that are being maintained, we get an understanding of how effective that our business is operating, to the same effect that, we can gauge how effective that our vehicle is performing by the metrics on our dashboard. So,
Yeah.
hopping back into what a dashboard, the components of an effective dashboard, because the reality is, with all of the AI that we have, with,
Mm-hmm.
simple tools like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, we can build our own infrastructure that
Yeah.
gives us the ability to really know where we are. And this is an example of that. So,
But if I'm a business owner, I'm gonna probably feel like I don't have time for that. It's a lot of work. I don't know where to start.
right,
Um,
right,
and I want the information, right? And I want to have the dashboard because I want to get in my car and drive, but where to start?
right. And that is where, this piece of the conversation comes in at, as far as what an effective dashboard can actually look like. What we're looking at here now is a very, very busy dashboard. However, the reason that it is busy is because it speaks to not only the the lagging indicators, but also the leading indicators as well. So when I say leading versus lagging indicators,
Mm-hmm.
our revenue performance is a lagging indicator, because like that's the result that comes in. Whereas the leading indicators are those stats that we can track proactively that we know are going to feed into that lagging uh,
Mm.
indicator. So, for example, with the revenue, what is upstream of revenue actually being generated are one-to-ones being conducted, and those one-to-ones converting into discovery meetings where we're actually discovering all of the problems and putting together a solution for those identified problems, which then converts into the presentation where we're presenting our offer via an estimate or a bid, which then leads to the actual conversion. And
Mm-hmm.
once we've achieved the actual conversion, then we get into another lane of maximizing the lifetime value of that converted customer. In other words, once I have you, once a business has secured a new customer, how is that same customer empowered to become an even larger patron and contributor to the
Yeah.
growth of the business? So that's the lifetime value piece. So let's just talk about some of the parameters here. I spoke about the leading and lagging indicators, which
Mm-hmm.
on this tracker, when we're looking at the collected revenue up here at the top, that is the actual amount of revenue that hit the bank account. And then we also have our generated revenue. And the difference between those two is when I want to talk I'm going to talk specifically to trades based businesses just to keep everything kind of clean.
Okay.
So when an HVAC company closes out $20,000 worth of jobs last week, that doesn't necessarily mean that $20,000 are going to hit the bank account, because in the 20,000 that was generated, you've got merchant fees that have to be paid to the processor, like the point of sale system.
Mm-hmm.
So you got those, and then you also have accounts receivables based on the payment terms. So if we closed a job last week that we're not going to be collecting for another 30 to 45 days, then there's going to be a gap between the amount that we generated versus the amount that we collect. And by tracking both of those metrics, you gain an understanding of like the true health of your business, because to be generating the revenue and not collecting it in a timely manner is a whole other issue.
Yeah.
And Matasa, you would be shocked and amazed at the amount of companies that have already generated the revenue and they haven't collected it because they so busy in the day to day of survival that they're not able to make that call to their customer to say,
To
hey,
get my money?
yes.
No. I'm gonna need that. I'm gonna be on you every day. I'm gonna send an automated text to you every morning. Good morning. Pleasure doing business with you. Run that check. What are you talking about? I'm too busy to collect my money. The lights gonna be off.
So
That's
what,
crazy.
like, you are speaking from a place of logic and emotion. The space of reality, unfortunately, for a lot of business owners is we have made all of this money, but I got to survive the day.
Mm,
So while I'm surviving the day, I don't have the time to call this person that owes me money because I'm dealing with the person that's paying me right now, or the person that I got to serve right now.
mm-hmm.
And it starts to build up. So that is a reason why the accounts receivables balance is also tracked here on our dashboard, because again, the gap between what's generated versus collected is oftentimes going to rest between what's collected in merchant fees from that point of sale system, or the what has not been collected because we got outstanding balances. Now, those are the lagging indicators, though. However, as far as
Mm,
the amount of collected and generated revenue, when we're talking about the leading indicators. So down here we got some of our sales metrics where we're looking at the amount of the revenue that we've generated that we're spending on advertising and marketing in order to create more awareness for the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're looking at the advertising and marketing, this too is a lagging indicator because we find out what that looks like after it's already, kind of hit
Yeah.
the. But when we're talking about the activities that go into understanding what this metric is going to look like, that's all of the preceding work. So for example, let's say that a company is using um radio for. No, that one's more complicated. Let's go with Facebook ads.
Okay.
So if we are paying for Facebook ads, the amount that we spend for those Facebook ads are going to show up here in the percentages. But the leading indicators that we really care about are the amount of engagement that's being generated, like what's the reach? How many people are we reaching? How many people are engaging in the post as far as how many likes are we getting? How many follows are we getting? How many shares are we getting? The actual engagement in the post. And then what our call to action is. So if we are whatever content that we are boosting and actually putting ad spend behind, what is our call to action? What do we want them to do? Are we asking them to go to our website? Are we asking them to DM us? Are we asking them to follow us? Are we asking them to give us a call? What are we asking them to do in that paid advertisement? And all of that factors into those leading indicators that we are then going to be proactively monitoring to
Mm.
understand how well that ad spend is returning. So if we're spending money to boost posts and our reach is not increasing, our engagement is not increasing, people are not complying with the call to action, then we have opportunity there. But if we're not paying attention to those stats and we're just spending the money, again,
May I ask how we
go,
get
please.
those stats?
Yes, absolutely. So when we go into the Facebook dashboard or any your social media dashboard, so if it's Facebook, if it's Instagram is Meta, so it's all Facebook and Instagram are inside of the Meta Business Suite. If it's YouTube, then you're going to go into the analytics of your YouTube account. If you're distributing um, on X or any of the other social media platforms, you're going to want to go into the dashboards to gain an understanding of like what's actually happening. Now, with that, data is only as valuable as how and when we use it. In other
Mm.
words, if we are looking at last month's February's closed out data, and it is now March 13th, and we find out that in February, our reach increased 87%. Like that can be an exciting stat to look at
Yeah,
until you ask
absolutely.
the follow-up question of, well, when did that 87% increase
Mm.
happen? Did it happen? Was it evenly distributed throughout the course of the month? Did it happen within a specific week? Or like, how did we achieve such growth?
Right.
And let's say that we achieved the majority of that 87% growth in the second week of February. And we are now at March 13th. What is the likelihood of us remembering all of the activities that happened in the second week of February?
People don't remember what they did yesterday. You're talking about last month, the second week. It's a wrap.
Right. And that is the value of adapting a strategy in which we're focused on winning the year a week at a time. Because
Mm.
if we're looking at last week's results and we can see significant variances, how difficult is it for us to remember what happened last week if we're looking at a significant gap? Because Matassa, you'll be shocked and amazed to see how quickly that it jogs a memory when you see a steep decline in performance. You like, ho, 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 ho. So, because when we scroll down and we look at our EBITDA down here, right, and we see that our overall earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization has gone down. Well, now I care more about what caused my profitability to go down. So I'm going to think deeper about what happened last week because I know the effect that it created,
Right.
as opposed to looking at it a month later. And it's just a group together of all of the data. It that
Yeah.
doesn't really tell the story adequately. So again, by looking at our leading indicators, and in this instance, because right now we're just talking about revenue as a lagging indicator, and the leading indicators that feed into that that revenue performance, whether that revenue is generated or collected. So
Mm.
here, what we're looking at are the amount of new customers that we're adding in, because the amount of customers that are being added into the system on a weekly basis, that gives us insight into how much growth that
Mm.
we're experiencing on a weekly basis. So if we know that on average we add 7 new customers to our database each week, and then we have a week in which we had 14 here, well, that's double what the quarterly average is. When we see that 14, we're going to dig into that. We're going to ask the question, okay, so look, clearly, that
Mm-hmm.
14, something happened for our customer growth to double what our average is. What did we do to achieve such an incredible outcome? Because whatever it was that caused that, we want to double and triple down on
Yeah.
that,
We won't do that again.
right? Over and over again. Conversely, when we look at a steep decline back down to 5,
Mm.
okay, so we know that it was really something special that happened that week. Because when you look at the full quarter, there is only one week that's that high,
Yeah.
which means that there were some activities going on. There were some posts that were really hitting, right? Like they really did their job. Those posts that we had out on social media, they must have really done their job for us to see that type of increase. So now we're going to go back and look at the content that we put out last week, and we're going to analyze. Okay, so it was this carousel that had the most engagement that we released last week. And it had, you know, 18 comments, and we got 2 DMs, and we got 5 phone calls, all from that one post. So what kinds of posts are we getting ready to be releasing more of?
Mm-hmm. Plenty of carousels. Plenty of carousels.
But that comes from the data. But again, if we're not tracking any of the data and we're just releasing carousels and we're paying for those carousels to be boosted,
Mm.
that's not the full site picture, right? So that's the value of understanding the leading and lagging indicators and how they tie together. So that's new customers. Then when we talk about one-to-ones, so I know here in Colorado Springs, in-person networking is a huge piece of business growth because this is a more relation-based community as opposed to transactional. So in Denver, Denver is far more transactional in the sense of like what you got for me? Like what are you going to deliver?
Uh-huh.
Whereas here in in Colorado Springs, it's more truly the know, like, and trust factor. Like, how much do I know you? How much do I like you? How much do I trust you? And if I don't have those three pillars built within our relationship, the likelihood of me spending money with you is greatly diminished.
Mm.
That's how Colorado Springs is kind of set up. So the how we're having one-to-ones really matter. How we're going about doing that. And like this is the reason that this is an important metric in a community like Colorado Springs is the worst thing that we can do is to become a professional networker. And what I define as a
Mm.
professional networker is someone that shows up to all of the events. Like you see them everywhere. And they always, exchanging business cards with folks, having coffee and conversations that lead to nowhere.
Oh,
So they always show up. You always see them, but they ain't doing no business. They ain't passing no business. Like the main thing is not the main thing
yeah.
no longer. Because if we go back to what caused them to start networking in the beginning, it was to generate leads.
Right.
And then along the way, they just got comfortable with not meeting that objective. So, and more comfortable with the idea of just showing up.
Mm.
So, in order for us to truly measure the results of that investment, because that is an investment, those one-to-ones are an investment. But what is that investment returning? Well, again, if we're not tracking those things, it's kind of hard to know. So, obviously, when we're having the one-to-ones, our intended outcome in most instances is to either progress to a discovery meeting
Mm-hmm.
or progress to a referral being passed. So, depending on the strategy or the intent of the one-to-one that's being conducted, we measure our success accordingly, as
Mm.
opposed to just kind of emotionally going through the motions of continuing to show up to these meetings, these one-to-ones, and it not producing anything but a bunch of wasted time.
Mm.
So, taking a look at our one-to-ones gives us that insight. Then, when we're looking at the amount of discovery meetings that are being set up as a result of the one-to-ones, or for a trades-based company, that's going to be a job walk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're identifying the scope of the job. So how many job walks are we able to are we averaging per week? Because that is a leading indicator to what our revenue is going to be. If we're not walking jobs, we're not presenting bids or estimates. If we're not presenting bids or estimates, work is not being approved. If work is not being approved, then work is not being completed. If work is not being completed, then we're not collecting revenue.
No money.
So it all ties together. And understanding what those activities, what the volume of those activities are, is quintessential to truly having intentional control over the outcomes that are being produced from the activities that we're investing in. So, from the amount of, site visits or job walks that are being completed, we're measuring how many estimates are actually being delivered. And, you can even add in there the amount of those estimates that are being delivered. In other words, if last week we sent out 6 estimates for a combined total of $25,000,
Mm-hmm.
and we're tracking those stats on a weekly basis, then over time we're going to know how many estimates that we need to be sending out per week in order to hit our sales goal.
Now, would
And
it be easier to track the estimates? Because just because you give me an estimate, I may not go with you. Your estimate may be too high. So would
and
it
that's
be?
Yeah, that's the point. That's the reason. That's the value in tracking that, because
Mm.
if we know that we sent out 6 estimates and 2 of them were approved, then we can look at the 4 that were disapproved and
Mm.
analyze what caused, like what we feel caused that to not convert, and we
Okay.
start having those conversations. So it's like, you know what? When I gave them the invoice, I it was not the invoice. When I gave them the estimate, rather, I failed to explain this piece, because when it comes to price in business, generally, what causes price to be a problem is when the value proposition isn't clearly understood. So if I'm coming in with an estimate and I just hand it to the person and walk out, then it's a good chance that that's not going to convert.
Yeah.
But when I'm able to have the appropriate conversation where I'm conditioning the lead to understand that this problem that I'm solving is their problem to solve, and they got to own that it's their problem to solve, right? If I'm coming with an estimate of this is what I think you need, but they they don't own that as a problem that they have to solve, then that's going to lead to um, a diminishment of conversion. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, um, understanding again how many of the estimates that are being delivered, and then how many of those that are actually converting as well. And then when we start talking about tracking metrics like the amount of reviews that we've received, if we know that we average, so and based on these stats, we're averaging 1 Google review per week, and then all of a sudden, we see here we had 3 reviews. Well, if we average 1 a week and last week we had 3, let's talk about that. Like, what happened last week to cause, because we're above our quarterly
Mm-hmm.
average. So, and we want to keep that momentum going. We want to be intentional about growing that growth. So that's that. And then when we start talking about Google spending, this is one of the things I see this too often, where the Google spend is damn near on autopilot. Like it's just being spent, and there's no tracking on the amount of clicks that are manifesting from that Google spend, and how many conversions. Which on Google is interesting, because
Mm.
the parameters that constitute a conversion varies from business to business, and it's based on how those settings are configured on the Google side. So if someone clicks on the call me option, or if they click on the navigate to me, like if they searched you the in the GPS, in one of the GPS systems on your phone, if you search
Mm-hmm.
for a business and then you click to navigate to that business, right? Is that counted as a conversion? The phone calls, is that counted as a convert? There,
Hmm.
it's based on how it's set up on the back end. So, like, that's an important piece to understand as well when it comes to the Google spin. But
So if I go to Google Maps and I search a HVAC company and I see one that's nearby and I call them from that search, that's tracked as a Google search, like it's a good thing
it
that
depends
happened.
on, and that's what I'm saying. It depends on how it's set up within the Google profile. So
Okay.
if that is one of the contributing factors or not. So that's why it's important to know how the Google configuration is actually set up for each individual business.
Wow.
And again, these are things that folks are not thinking about. So as they're not thinking about those things, what they know is that they spending with whatever amount that is going out.
Mm.
but what's coming back becomes a whole different conversation. So I've seen situations where the amount of the dollar amount, excuse me, the dollar amount spent shot up through the roof while the clicks simultaneously went down.
Mm-mm.
So if we are spending more and receiving less clicks, that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
And if our clicks are going up and our conversions are going down, that's an issue too. So again, tracking those leading indicators gives us insight into those lagging indicators. And then the amount of phone calls, and this is the piece that I really see being overlooked. Now, uh, because in trades based businesses specifically, or service based businesses specifically, the amount of converted business that flows through a phone call, a good percentage of those conversions have a phone call to do with them at some point.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't know how many phone calls that we are averaging per week, we have no idea what good looks like. So, like, we can feel as though, man, it feel like the phone been ringing all week. But then when you look at the stats and you like, oh, we actually flat to baseline. Like we last week we actually had 16 calls and we averaged 14. So although it felt like, I don't know why it felt that way, but I guess it wasn't. Or you look at it and your base is 14 and you had 27 calls and you're like, oh shit, all right. So now I want to go and look back again upstream of what what precedes the phone call.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's social media, it's Google, it's one-to-ones, it's all of these things. Well, things really manifested last week because we increased our phone calls significantly. But to that point, every phone call is not created equal. So categorizing the types of phone calls. So
Mm.
if someone is calling as an existing customer versus a new lead,
Mm.
that distinction, there's value in knowing that distinction. Because if we know that our increased calls went, so let's say that we average 50 phone calls a week. And of the 50 phone calls, 25 of them are new leads and 25 of them are existing customers. And that's the average breakdown of our performance. And then all of a sudden, we have a week in which we maintained our 50 phone calls, but instead of that 25-25 distribution, 40 of the calls were existing customers and 10 of them were new.
Ooh, we need to know why.
Right. But if you don't know what the averages are and the gap between that average, you just know you had 50 phone calls or that it was a lot of phone calls. You might not know that
Right.
it's 50, but you know that you were on the phone a lot. But as far as the scale of business being conducted on that phone call, that becomes a whole different conversation. And the
Wow.
way that we dial into that again is by understanding the types of phone calls that are coming in. So those are all leading indicators as well.
So if I'm busy, I'm out here jobbing it. I'm fixing HVACs. I'm fixing all kind of air ducts and whatnot. I ain't got time to be. This a new car. This a old car. This a how am I, how do I track? How do I get here?
So systems, time blocking, and discipline.
Ooh.
So because this is the thing, because someone is busy every day does not mean that they are productive every day. So and this is something I see it all the time with my clients where they spending 12 to 16 hours a day in their business doing a bunch of stuff. And the stuff that they're doing is feeding a perpetual cycle of insanity. Because what is insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Oh, I'm laughing so hard because I say this to myself because this is something I used to tell my airmen. Just because you busy don't mean you productive. And I say this to myself like when I'm starting to feel like I haven't done anything, like whether it's midday, I'm like, okay, you looking busy, but are you being productive? Because busy don't mean productive.
100%. And that matters. You know, when starting a business, that's a that's a mentality. It's like, man, I'm so hungry. However many hours that it take to get some work that I don't got to ask somebody to for permission to be sick or for permission to take a day off. Whatever it take, I'm here for it. And that cycle just becomes the norm.
Yeah.
So, like, for those folks that are comfortable with that norm, God bless you. You know what I mean? Do your thing, man. I'm rooting for you. Hopefully,
Me
hopefully
too.
it work out for you. You know what I mean? But it comes to a point where when you recognize that what you're doing is leading to that cycle of insanity and you're continuing to experience it over and over and over again, the question becomes, am I comfortable with this outcome? And if I am, again, keep on going. If not, some of the things that we're talking about right now are opportunities to make an effective pivot.
Mm.
So by looking at, if we're looking at a 16, if we're averaging 16 hours working in the business and that 16 hours is encompassed in the time, like actually doing, providing the services that have been sold and, the administrative stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
making payroll and making bank runs and, you know, doing the other auxiliary business tasks. If we know that we're averaging that 16 hours, then we can proactively look at our schedule and say, all right, next week, I need this amount in revenue in order to hit my revenue goals for the week. So, in order to hit that revenue goal, I need to have this amount of work scheduled. So, that's the first check. Do I have enough scheduled next week to hit my revenue goals for the week? If I don't, then there's a path to take to address that.
Mm-hmm.
If I do have my requisite work, all right, now I'm looking at the business responsibilities that I have. So I actually need to be making cold calls on, next week. So next week I need to make 25 cold calls because the 25 cold calls generally results in 6 discovery meetings being scheduled, which results in 5 jobs being sold. So I'm going to schedule my cold calls on Monday from 12 to 2 because I'm not scheduled for jobs at that during that time period. And that's when I'm going to do my cold calling. Or I'm going to schedule from 8 to 9 a.m. on Tuesday for my social media engagement. And that's when I'm going to schedule the content that's going to be released for the week. And then Tuesday at noon, I'm going to update my social media tracker that tracks all of the reach and engagement stats so that I know what what the prior week's performance contributed to this week's outcomes.
Mm.
It's being, again, disciplined to recognizing I've already committed myself to a cycle of insanity and I'm intentionally breaking myself out of that by taking control of my schedule as opposed to the schedule controlling me, because that's what ends up happening. The
Yeah.
entrepreneur is being owned by being run by their schedule as opposed to the other way around. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
If you don't got time to call somebody that owe you money, because you're going to make 25 cold calls and one hot call, because I'm going to need that check. 26
Absolutely.
calls.
Those are some of the parameters relative to how the sales leading indicators tie to the revenue lagging indicator. But then we also have cost of goods sold. So when we're talking cost of goods sold is going to be the production cost to deliver the products and services that have been sold. So in a service based business, specifically in the trades, we're looking at the labor. So that labor, whether it be W-2 or subcontracted labor,
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at any disposal costs. So like, if we got a dumpster out there to keep the job site clean or what have you, we got those disposal fees. We've got our fuel costs. We've got our material costs, right? Like so those are and we got permitting. So permits are required as well. So we got certain things that are just a part of doing business. And all of that stuff is going to factor into our overall cost of goods sold. So uh, the cost of goods sold is then serving as another lagging indicator. So when we start talking about the leading indicators that feed into that lagging indicator, labor, because again, the labor, rather it be W-2 or subcontracted, is a vital component to being able to produce and deliver whatever it is that has been sold.
Mm-hmm.
So the leading indicators that flow into your labor metric are going to be hours tracked. So when we start talking about hours tracked and understanding the difference between how many hours that we planned for the day versus the amount of hours that we actually clocked for the day
Mm-hmm.
and what that time produced in revenue and understanding that correlation. So here, let's look at the end of the quarter just for this example data, where we know. All right, so these are the total hours. So taking a look here, an average of 132 hours contributes to 5 jobs being completed on average, which also correlates to 23.6% of the total cost of goods sold on a weekly basis, which in turn produces the 15,922. That's
Okay.
what our average performance has been. So as we may put together a new standard operating procedure that addresses the way that we assign and measure work being completed.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're implementing that process, we're then looking at the results that are being produced. So, are we able to reduce the average amount of labor hours while increasing the amount of revenue coming in and that be a direct result of that SOP that was drafted and implemented? We can
Mm.
see that we reduced our hours, which in turn reduced our payroll as a percentage of the cost of goods sold, which in turn also translated into more revenue being generated. So we've achieved more efficiency. And that's how all of that
Mm.
stuff kind of ties together. That makes sense?
Yeah. Because if you're more efficient, it don't take you as long to do the job. So I'm not having to pay for 4 hours worth of work for you because you got the work done in 2 hours. So I only have to pay you for 2 hours of work.
100%. But then there's also the opportunity cost. And this is the piece that gets missed all too often, which is, so if we planned for the week to use 150 man hours, and that 150 man hours results in us achieving our revenue goal for the week, and we end up using 130 hours, and we actually uh, did more revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for the novice, when they look at that, that's just win 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 across the board. For somebody that is truly disciplined to growing their business, they see that there were 20 hours that could have been sold, like additional work could have been completed within those 20
Mm.
hours. Like
It was money missed.
the 20 hours got paid for anyway in payroll. So we could have
Mm.
turned those 20 hours into additional revenue, but we didn't. So opportunity cost. It all ties together.
Mm.
So yeah, leading and lagging indicators. It's vitally essential to have those that insight. So
Yeah.
again, what this dashboard gives you insight into is how fast that you're going, if you got enough in your tank to get where you're going, if you are in danger of overheating because you don't have enough internal capacity to keep up with the sales demand, or the SOPs that ensures that everything in the engine compartment is properly lubricated.
I'm not a business owner, but if I was, I would feel like I need a dashboard. Because when you think like when you're comparing the dashboard of my business to the dashboard of my car, if the car dashboard is out, I got to take an Uber. And so this dashboard for your business is just as and equally important because it's your livelihood, is how you're making money. You're spending money, you're putting into it, you're putting in your blood, sweat, and tears. So why not make the most of it and get the most bang for your buck? So if you are a business owner and you feel like you need to call an Uber for your business, put a one in the chat. Goodness gracious. You got to get a dashboard, people. If you running the business in 2026 and you don't have a dashboard, you got to holler at Jesse.
Or you can build it on your own,
Or
right?
build it on
So
your own. But he already got, come on, man. He'd already showed you the information. Bullseye.us.
the reason that we're doing these lives is because, like, in my heart, in my spirit, truly, even if they not working with Bullseye Consulting, that's cool. Like, take the information and put it to work.
Yeah.
Like, activate the information in your business to change your life. None of this is rocket science, and none of it is new, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is standard business stuff. However, it's not taught in public school, because in public school we're taught to, like, conveyor belt style, be fed into corporate America.
Yeah.
So to be intentional about breaking that mold, jumping off of the conveyor, jumping off of the hamster wheel, and saying, "Nah, bruh, I got to do this on my own." Like, it takes guts and discipline to really do that.
Definitely.
And in doing that, again, it can the amount of satisfaction that comes from, I don't have to ask for permission to be sick. I don't have to ask for permission to take a day off.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that be motivation enough for most folks to just endure through the pain and suffering of operating a business without understanding the principles of business.
And
Right? Like,
you said uh, this is not rocket science, and it's not, but it's one of those things that one, you don't know what you don't know about what you're missing out on. We know our car has a dashboard because we drive a car. We, I don't think people understand, or maybe they do understand and they don't know how to get there, that my business requires some tracking so I can know what I'm doing. And if you like me and you watching the replay, I don't have a business, but if I did, I'm watching the replay, I'm just gonna screenshot and zoom out and then make the Excel spreadsheet if you ain't gonna work with Bullseye Consulting. But I'm just saying that's a little thing I do. I screenshot and then I copy. But anyway, it ain't rocket science, but people I don't think are taught how to be great business owners. We just feel like I want the freedom and I'm sick of this crap. And then we go do it. So this is great, wonderful, terrific information. We appreciate you.
So this is all a part of our strategic vision and forecasting system, which is one of the 7 systems that we coach on in order to really create the separation between being a prisoner of one's own passion versus owning a business that operates independently of the ownership apparatus and continues to engineer market value, enterprise value into the business that truly reflects on the balance sheet and is going to be because one of the tragedies that I've seen too many times, I think one of the worst examples that I've personally experienced. So I had a client that he was in his 70s, late 70s,
Wow.
still working every day.
No.
And the tragedy in that was his value had no his business had his value had no his business had no value because the second that you take him out of it, it's
Mm.
not a bit, it's just a building. Like he was the heart and soul of everything. So
Wow.
like you take that out of it and again it's just a building. So there is value in the form of, whatever that the building is worth, but the business itself, liquidating the equipment, you get a fraction of what of what was spent on the equipment by liquidating it. But that's really the only value that had been engineered into it because again, it was the business rested and died on him. And that's a tragedy because at the point in time that I was working with him, he had been operating in his industry since Moby Dick was a minnow. So like you would think
Bro.
that if you've been working doing something for so long that it would be a liberating factor in your life as opposed to a ball and chain type of thing. And again, that's tragic. So I understand the necessity more than ever now for us to have our own skills and entrepreneurial capabilities to
Mm-hmm.
survive because the world, if y'all ain't paying attention, the
Oof,
world
child.
is changing drastically. The foundation under our feet shifting dramatically as we speak. So having a skill that you have the ability to monetize is a matter of survival or will be a matter of survival as we continue to kind of move to what's coming. So having that skill but being able to turn it into truly an asset that liberates you, that's what this conversation is about. And again, if that comes from us working together or that comes from you taking, scrupulous notes and more importantly, putting that to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like this not just being another live that you just sitting and watching. This is a call to action. That's my intent. So with that, as we're talking about the strategic vision and forecasting system, you know, the that system is broken down in quite a bit of detail at www.bullsinc.us/01 because that is our first system of the 7, and great insight into how all of the components of that system kind of tie together. And then when you go to www.bullsinc.us/courses, that will give you insight into the perimeters of the full course load and how everything ties together in order for a business owner to have enough insight to serve as their own interim chief financial officer. So yeah, we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis, just going through all of these key components because again, if we working together or not. That's not my top concern. My top concern is like we are in trouble as a nation if we don't have more small businesses that understand the assignment and start getting to it.
In trouble. Yes. So I am on www.bullsinc.us/courses. It's laid out for you. He got y'all self-paced learning all the courses. He gonna get you together. Cause what we doing? We winning the year 1 week at a time. And we not running our business off hope. We running it off data, information, numbers. Stop playing with your business, people. Because if somebody else was playing with your business, you would be talking to them crazy. Uh, y'all know what I was gonna say. You catch my drift.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
yeah, if this is your likelihood, take it serious. You know, don't be a POP. I know y'all think about that girl who blind. That ain't what we're talking about. We're talking about a prisoner of passion. Stuck at work because it's your passion, but you can't go nowhere like that 70-some-year-old man. I'm not about to be 70 years old going to a business every day of my life. Shut it down. Shut it down. You won't get no HVAC out of me today. Listen, no POPs, okay? And these are three things you got to get to be successful: a system, time blocking, and discipline. Because y'all here running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Get together. And if you can't get together, call Jesse. He gonna get you together. I don't know if he wants y'all to have his number, but go to the website and he gonna get you straightened out. Because you can't just be calling people all willy-nilly. Okay? All
Oh
right.
man.
Listen, I've been loving getting into this information. We had our pre-meeting call and we're gonna have our post-meeting call. But I love that you are giving out this information in a more valuable kind of long form. I know it's going to be chopped up and we're going to put the little pieces out, but I really appreciate that you are, one, doing something that you love to do, because I know you probably thought you loved the Air Force, but look at you now. And two, that you are wanting to see other small business owners succeed and you're helping them in the way that you help them, and that's outstanding, and I appreciate that.
I appreciate you, man. And the conversation will continue. So, for all of you who have been in attendance or run across us, however that you run across us, you could be anywhere in the world, but you are here with us, and I appreciate you. Thank
If
you
you're
for your
watching the
time.
replay, drop replay in the comment. #replay so we know that you came back and showed us some love. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right. Thank y'all.
Until next time.